All right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for viewing this remarkable documentary. I was reflecting on the nature of documentaries, right? And it's a combination of storytelling, right? It's telling people's testimony, people's story, people's experience, and also art, right? It's sharing perspective. And so now we have a chance to kind of dig deep into those perspectives and ask questions of many of the fantastic people who participated in the film. So before we dive into questions, I would like to provide brief bios of our participants here tonight. As I mentioned, my name is Jen Sear, and I am our panel moderator and representing the International Dyslexia Association of Northern New England. All right, let's begin. We have Mrs. Doe here tonight, okay? And Mrs. Doe is the mother of Jane Doe, the student, right? And she is a key plaintiff in the case featured in this film, Blame It on Gutenberg. Although working by day in financial services, she is actively working to help and support children with dyslexia through her volunteer efforts as a board member of a local special purpose private school and as an outreach committee member of the Morelli Foundation, and attendance at conferences such as the World Literacy Summit and the IDA's annual conference. Thank you so much for being here today, Mrs. Doe. Dr. Jan Wazowitz is a literacy and language expert and a practitioner who has over 40 years of experience working with struggling readers and writers, including children with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and other language-based learning disabilities. She is a published author and is frequently invited to speak on best practices for literacy assessment and instruction. Dr. Wazowitz is a passionate advocate for tearing down silos so that researchers and education professionals across various disciplines can learn from one another, and so that education professionals of all stripes can work together on the front lines for more efficient and effective student outcomes. This mission is the foundation of the free and very entertaining and educational Spell Talk listserv, which she launched nearly 20 years ago and continues to moderate daily. Dr. Wazowitz is a speech-language pathologist and a board-certified specialist in child language who is licensed to practice in the states of Illinois and Florida. Additionally, she holds a professional educator license with elementary and secondary endorsements from the State Teacher Certification Board of Illinois. All right, and then we have Dr. Sarah Stetson, the astounding administrator who was represented in the film. Dr. Stetson has 30 years of experience in educational leadership as an LD specialist, school psychologist, special education department head, special education director, director of student services, and an assistant superintendent. She's led special education, 504 committees, McKinney-Vento, Title I, MLL, social work, nursing, mental and behavioral health, civil rights teams, district safety, and multiple grant projects and curriculum initiatives. Dr. Stetson has been a faculty member at Revere University for 22 years and is the recipient of Revere's Outstanding Educator Award, given to an individual who brings the highest distinction to themselves and their communities through their teaching and mentoring of students in education and mental health. Dr. Stetson is also the recipient of an AASA Award for Systems Change in Literacy, a National Magna Award for developing a system of care approach for mental and behavioral health services in schools, a New Hampshire Department of Education Parent Involvement Award, and a National Title I Circle of Excellence Award for closing the literacy gap. Dr. Stetson's work in literacy has been highlighted in School Administrator Magazine, as well as Educational Digest. Amy Phelan is here. Amy is a board member of our IDA-NNEA group, and she is also an attorney. And I'm locating her biography right now. Here we go. She works with Miller and Phelan in Portland, Maine. Her practice consists of representing students with disabilities and their families in special education cases. She also works as a juvenile defender. Amy authored the amicus brief filed in the DOA case on behalf of IDA and other dyslexia advocates. And she is a current board member of our IDA-NNEA and has helped us tremendously in our understanding of our organization's bylaws. And we are so grateful that she is here today. Mr. Richard O'Meara is here. Welcome, Mr. O'Meara. He is an attorney with Murray, Plum and Murray in Portland, Maine, and he has been representing students with disabilities and their families in education cases for nearly 3 decades. He was the lead attorney representing the plaintiffs in the Doe's case featured in this film. Welcome, everyone. All right. I have some questions, but as I was watching the movie, I was taking notes, and I feel like the movie was so well crafted that I was writing the question down. It was answered in the film. So that was exciting to me because I really learned a lot. And I was also impressed by the amount of linkage to research and brain science in the film. So my first question, I'm going to direct to Dr. Wazowitz, which is thinking about all of this research, all of this frontier. Do you have kind of a wish for the next frontier in research in the field of literacy and dyslexia?
Well, I think Dr. Gabb in the movie probably film talked about. First of all, I wanted to say this is my first time meeting Mrs. Doe in person, and I want to publicly thank you for what you've done. Of course, not just for your daughter, but for so many other children who are going to follow behind her. And these kinds of dialogues, bringing this to awareness is what's really going to change things. Thank you. Thank you. And then as far as what would I like to see, so much in research, but I would like to see earlier identifiers, and Dr. Gabb did talk about that, and I know she's working very much on finding a way to identify these students. We actually can identify them quite early, even in utero. There are some differences that are being observed, and getting intervention early, even if it's preventative. And so that would be what I would like to see. There are a lot of early warning signs, though, that we in the meantime can be looking for, and one of them was with Jane Doe, a history of speech language delay. That's the first one. I hope I have that correct. I think she did have a history of speech language services. Yeah. So that's one. And I think when parents would call me for private practice services, I would always ask simple questions. Is there a history of speech language delay with your child or anyone in the family? And is there a history of dyslexia or any type of learning problem in the family? And third question would be, depending on the age of the child, does your child not like to read? Do they not want to engage in books? All of those very early on are the biggest red flags and such simple questions to ask. And also mothers, if a mother's concerned, in all my 40 years, I've yet to meet a mother who is concerned who has a child who doesn't have an identifiable disorder of some type. So I think you said it best, Mrs. Doe, at the end, trust your instincts. But until we have, that identifier, there are so many things we can be looking out for.
Thank you so much for your response. I have a question in the chat that is an excellent question, and it's kind of the question that I want to ask Mr. O'Meara. So, Mr. O'Meara, why is it so hard for us to say dyslexia or to say it's a specific learning disability? Why do we have to dance around this term dyslexia? And thinking about the connection to ed law, right, which is this very complex thing that many of us don't understand. Would you be able to respond to that?
Well, what you have to remember is that the regulations that we have and the statute that we have don't have a category for dyslexia, have a category for specific learning disabilities. So we need to use that language when we're advocating for kids. Otherwise, the schools don't always hear what the request is, right? So I think that's important. But it obviously includes dyslexia within that category. I think what I'm seeing most in my practice now is that school districts, now that they sort of have the Doe case out there and they're admitting more kids to special ed, the problem now is more of a programming problem, because a student like Jane comes in and she had 2 different processing disorders that were affecting her reading. and the school focused on one first, and then we had to fight for them to focus on the other one. And what's happening in a lot of schools that I've seen now is there's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach, so that if you have a disorder of dyslexia or even a specific learning disability, the kids are not always getting the right programs to help their particular kind of reading disorder. And that's the source of a lot of litigation now, where we have kids in the wrong program for 2, 3, 4 years, not really developing. And so I don't think it's enough to just have a category. I think we need to focus on what the law says, which is look at the child's unique needs, really focus on what it is that they're struggling with. And I think people have to keep remembering that within specific learning disability, which I think I said in the movie, there are 3 different categories that relate to reading within the 8 that are allowed. And remember that in this case, Jane qualified only because one of them applied to her, not 3. And so we need to be really specific about what the child's needs are, because if you don't remediate the need, then you end up with years of frustration and not a good success rate.
Thank you so much. I would like to move to Amy Phelan now. Amy, thinking about how should we schools be approaching our responsibility regarding meeting the academic needs of our population? And I'm thinking in general. I'm also thinking about things like universal screening, universal design for learning, but can you respond to that question?
Well, I'm a big fan of universal design, and I know I kind of popped in and out on some of the sessions today, and everyone seems to understand, in this community understands now that what benefits students who have a specific learning disability in these areas of reading also benefits everyone else. And I think every student can learn from structured literacy. And I think that's the way to go going forward. But it's a slow process. The change is slow. Attorney O'Mara mentioned that our work now in the dyslexia law is to get that specific programming for the students to be very specific to their individual needs. So I think this case is a few years old. We've gotten to this step where we can identify the student. We know grades alone do not disqualify the student from special services. And now the real push needs to be, let's get the structured literacy programming in there and tailor it specifically for the kids and their unique needs.
Thank you so much. So this leads me to my question for Dr. Stetson, who I'm in awe of everything you've accomplished. So thank you so much for being with us today. And picking the exact right question is tricky because there's so much I want to ask you, but I'm going to start here. From your perspective, can you describe some of the challenges school leaders face, right, when considering the vast range of academic needs that they are presented with and responsible for addressing? And then thinking about what is the responsibility of a school leader in addressing those needs?
Well, I don't think I'll go over the vast milieu of needs because we'll be here all night. But in terms of literacy, one of our prime directives is to seek out and find children that need our support. And so one of the challenges I think that one can experience is the community in the documentary, for example, was a wealthy community. Children had access to books and trips to museums and good vocabularies and people who read to them and so forth, and had in fact adopted a lot of literacy-like behaviors where, they memorized all of the early first and second grade words, which is most of the text, right? And so they looked as if they were reading, but they weren't actually. And convincing the staff that we were really missing something required a lot of work. It was very difficult and it was very painful for a lot of teachers who had essentially been doing the wrong thing despite best intentions. So you know, we had to start with a really good early universal screener, and the type of screener that really keys into those foundational elements that are most predictive of reading failure or success, if you will. And then we had to kind of show it to the teachers. And at first, you know, they went through a period of mourning where they blamed the test. Well, that's not the kind of activity we usually ask them to do, you know, and then sort of explaining how these tests are normed, and it was just as unfamiliar to everyone else that took it, and so forth. I think another challenge is really key and critical to the case that's outlined in this documentary, and that's one of fluency. There's a percentage of children who have a type of dyslexia that's really fluency based, and those children will learn to decode. And so they may look like their reading is developing until they hit a brick wall when they're in like 3rd or 4th grade, and it just becomes too complex, and then they cease to be able to comprehend. So you know, that community, when I came in, was missing that entire population of students, in addition to some of the students who weren't learning to decode. So those are some challenges when the reading disorders are masked. There are many more, but just cultural challenges. You know, if we were to go through the history of the reading wars in the United States, you know, we would see some of the big influencers maybe weren't grounded in actual reading science, but maybe some other disciplines. And so those things have been very influential in American curriculum.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Stowe, we're so glad that you're here and reviewing your journey as it was captured by the film. I'm sure it brings up a lot of memories for you. I have a few questions for you. I think the first thing is that it's kind of a where are they now? How is Jane Doe doing? How has this case kind of impacted your family life? And then would you have done anything differently?
Okay. Well, Jane has graduated from college and she's doing well. She is, as usual, a very hard worker, and she's trying to figure out, you know, what she's been teaching, but she's trying to figure out what her career will be. I can't. This case it had quite an effect on our family. I mean, it went on for 13 years. And we're all very aware of how important it is to learn to read, and how you have to advocate for yourself in certain situations. I think the only, you know, regret I would have is that it was so difficult and it was such a battle. I mean, had we in 1st grade, when they first said, well, let's test her, and they had questions, it could have been a whole different experience for my daughter had we gotten help early, you know. But we did finally get the services that she needed, and she can read well, and she likes to read, loves to read, which is wonderful. I think she was very fortunate to have had a lot of audiobooks as a child. We used to do a lot of driving, and I think that gave her the vocabulary that she would not have had because she wasn't reading at that level. So that really helped her. And so, you know, I guess my one regret was that it couldn't have been easier for her, because she did have to work very hard.
Thank you for sharing that. 13 years is a long time to commit to this, right? And so what kind of kept you going? What was the thought or the hope that kind of kept you going through all of these years of this court case?
My husband and I are both history majors. We read all the time. That is like our big activity. We're not really a games family, we read. And so I think it was very hard for me to imagine that she could not read. And so, and yeah, so basically, I just think it was, I wanted her to be able to read and be able to function effectively in this world where, like in the documentary, it talks about it's a world of print, and that's the reality. So I wanted her to be able to succeed in that world.
Thank you. It's that mother's commitment, right? We all want everything for our kids, and it's hard to imagine when we can't get what we ask for, right? Right. Something as simple as learning how to read. Well, thank you so much. We have quite a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to start pulling them up, and I have in my mind who might be able to answer them, but I'll let you guys raise your hands. How's that? Or let me know if you feel comfortable. So here's the first question. How does one remediate orthographic processing deficits as they were described in the movie? Is it through structured literacy approaches, or are there additional research and evidence-based approaches for students with this specific type of dyslexia? What do you think, Dr. Wasowitz?
I'm assuming she's referring to the fluency piece that never really came, right? Because Jane wasn't getting that automaticity. And what the research is pointing toward is that students will develop these storage of words that they need for the automaticity. They'll develop them more efficiently through spelling and encoding and writing than they will through reading instruction. And so the researchers don't know why or how that is, but there's been enough research to demonstrate that putting spelling instruction first together with reading instruction and coordinating the two can be really beneficial for these students. They probably won't ever get to that same level of automaticity or fluency, but it takes them further, if you will. And so I think that's something that we all need to be looking more at is how important spelling, phonological encoding, fancy term for spelling, and writing is in a curriculum.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking that tricky question.
I can just mention that in the case of Jane, and Mrs. Doe can talk about this, she did do tutoring during her 9th and 10th grade years with an exceptional tutor who was a Lindenwood Bell tutor who used the Seeing Stars program. That's what finally got her over the fluency, sort of the orthographic processing hump. And I don't know, Mrs. Doe, if you want to say more about that, but that actually worked and got her into college, which is a great result.
Right. She had had so much phonological tutoring in the earlier years, but then we realized with some testing in that 8th grade year that the visual processing was really the issue. And so that tutor, it was amazing. She could really work with her to get through the more complex text, the multisyllabic words that she just didn't have the skill to read. And she used one interesting anecdote was that she said that my daughter couldn't visualize, could not see the letters of a word. And she said, like, what do you see in your mind when you are asked to spell articulate? And she said, you probably see the letters in your mind. And I said, well, yes, I sort of can spell it and I read the letters in my mind. And she said, someone with a visual processing deficit, she doesn't see any of those letters. And so that was, that clarified a lot of things for me.
Amy, you raised your hand, yes?
Yes, I wanted to just add to that. One of the things that I do when I'm advocating for students at the IEP team level is when we talk about orthographic processing and that side of dyslexia is point out that this also has an impact on their math, because they have just as much difficulty seeing the symbols for multiplication, division, and how important that this work is to their entire, the entire curriculum. And you often do see the kids are also struggling with math, especially when they get into the doing equations and you have multiple different types of symbols. And we put in accommodations for them so that they're not just looking at the symbol, but maybe they also get the word, or they get a chart at the top that shows the different symbols for math. But it can be, not just confined to reading, but across the curriculum.
So if or an educator or somebody close to a student suspects that it's orthographic in nature, they may also consider math results on top of reading results. Is that?
Yes, and going back to the seeing stars issue, some of the newer cases that are coming up now, if there is an evaluator who specifically recommends that the student receive specialized instruction in orthographic processing skills, and specifically says through the Seeing Stars program, get that put in the IEP and make sure that the student is getting that instruction in the school. In Maine, I know more and more of our districts are giving, providing that training to educators, but we're really looking at getting that specific wording in the IEP for these students. I'm sure Attorney O'Mara could probably talk a little bit more about that. He's got a couple of these cases going on.
Yeah, my only concern with mentioning a specific program is there are other programs that can be just as effective, but I like getting the specific deficit in there if it's orthographic processing or phonological, whatever the case may be. And in the Seeing Stars, is there a lot of writing with that? I know I think there's the skywriting, but is there a lot of the handwriting? Because yeah, that seems to be, there's actually research in pre-literate children before they even get to kindergarten, that if they write versus copy, or even just match a letter on a keyboard, the part of the brain that eventually turns into the reading writing circuit develops in these 4-year-old children. So that's, again, this process of writing and getting that modality involved, that's really critical. But that can be done by different programs and not just Seeing Stars.
And I think you're getting at, one of the key issues and key challenges too. And that is that, we have speaking, listening, reading, and writing that are all connected. And we have different developmental trajectories and stages. And then horizontally, we have different types of dyslexia. So, I think some districts feel like, okay, well, we've screened for this. And so now we'll just give everybody Orton-Gillingham, or we'll just train all the teachers in this one thing. And it's really not that simple. And so, we've laid in a layered approach to different types of interventions just for these different types of circumstances. And we also spent a couple of years building what we call the follow-up assessment model. And so that is, okay, I've got my screener, now what? And so now I need to come in and I need to do a few things. I need to determine who are my false positives, because hopefully if I'm smart, I've chosen a screener that gets a lot of false positives because I don't want to miss anyone. And then second, what exactly at the real foundational or even subcortical level are we kind of dealing with in terms of a disability or a challenge? And how is this child moving through that trajectory? So we have a lot of follow-up assessment probes that look at, rapid naming and working memory and oral, all of those other kinds of things that can help us target an intervention more specifically. And then in terms of the developmental piece, building in those other interventions. So, once somebody's been through Orton-Gillingham and they can decode, great, but adolescents with language-based learning disabilities may need morphology and word structure work, and they may need vocabulary work and so forth. So it's pretty complex unless you map it out for the staff and then provide expert PD professional development training in all of those areas.
This reminds me of, I believe it's Louisa Moats who said that it's really not programs that teach children. Right. Teachers teach children, right. And really having well-informed teachers prepares you to make wise instructional decisions, right? So it's important. Thank you so much. We have a question that it kind of gets to the heart of this, and I'm going to preface this by saying this isn't an issue that is a main only issue, right? This is something we're seeing across the nation, right? Is we need to figure out a way to help children without getting mired in, the fact that, we're trying not to divert too many resources in one direction within a school system, right? So the question reads like this: can anyone explain why so many administrators don't seem to support the science of reading, and what can we do about it? Specifically, this person works as a reading specialist and feels that they are prevented from performing their duties, based on what they know. And they don't understand why this is. And they keep hearing the administrators say, this is a tier 1 problem, but then the district's not addressing the tier 1. Sarah, do you have a response to that?
Well, the best tier 3 is a good tier 1, right? And so, the children that are typically falling out rapidly may not be getting that universal screening and then expert differentiated instruction and time that they need before we move on to a referral. And the tiers in MTSS or response to intervention or whatever your state calls it are not things that you have to go through till you finally get to special ed. These are not the trials of Job, right? But I think people see it that way because of that pyramid structure. And really what we should be doing is assigning interventions according to the student's profile. And moving them directly into what they need and then worrying about the labeling later. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Thanks. Thank you very much. All right. We are doing really well with questions in the chat. So I would like to invite the participants to kind of gather your final thought. What would you like to leave us with today? And I will share a couple of things. There are resources that Dr. Wazowitz shared with us there in the chat. If you want to click on those and have access to those for following this presentation, I advise you to get into the chat and take a look at those. There were multiple questions about screening tools, and there are lots of good screening tools on the market, but you want to choose wisely, right? You want to choose tools that are going to raise the red flag if children have a deficit in a specific area. And then you want to be able to follow this up with tools that will allow you to dig deeper and get more information. And then make sure that if a child comes up for special education, the tools being used to assess that child capture the need in a way that is kind of really explicit, right? So I don't know if the administrators and teachers that are here in the chat have tools that they would like to recommend. I feel like I'm not here to sell any program or any assessment. I can happily share what we're using in my district that I like and believe in, right? And so I'm happy to put that in the chat as well. So on that note, let's go around the panel and invite each panelist to kind of give us the thought that they would like us to walk away with today. I'll start with you, Mr. O'Meara, because I know you need to leave.
All right. Well, I noticed that there's questions in the chat about sort of how do you recognize when there's a visual processing issue and how do you test for it? I'm not an expert in this area, but I do, for those out there who are not, one thing I've used with a lot of parents who come to my office is to ask them. A lot of times they haven't been assessed very well. The kids have not been assessed well. But I ask parents, and a lot of it's based on Jane Doe, who had this pattern. Does your child tend to spell the same word wrong in a variety of ways? And if a parent says yes, then that tells me that they really don't know what the word looks like. They're probably guessing, and I'm going to send them off to see if there's an orthographic issue, because a lot of times just parents picking up on that one thing, that the kid can't spell common words, not only spell it wrong, but they spell it a different way each time. It shows how insecure they are in their visual representation of that word in their mind's eye, like Mrs. Doe was saying. So I wanted to throw that out there. And my last thought that I wanted to give everybody was to basically give kudos to Mrs. Doe, because she would not let go of this case. And she faced almost every denial and attempt to kick her daughter out of special education that you could imagine multiple times, and was fought up and down the legal system. And she and her husband never gave up. And now she has a wonderful college educated daughter to show for it. But that's, to me, that's the moral of the story, is that advocacy is the key to the statute. Unfortunately, when Congress put it together, they left that up to parents, right? Because they don't really enforce the statute any other way. And it's nice when an exceptional parent comes along who really uses the statute for all it's worth and gets a good result. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your participation tonight. Let's move to Amy. Amy Phelan, what would your final thought be?
I'm gonna say kind of the same thing. I think Mrs. Doe and her family are just remarkable people, and I mean, it has been 13 years, and Mrs. Doe is still here. She's still advocating. She's still fighting, and I think that's what we need to do. And I became introduced to dyslexia as an English teacher back in the early 2000s, and it didn't seem like such a. It seems like the awareness has grown. I am really excited about the science of reading and the fMRI data. And one of the things I love about this film are all the pictures of brains. So, I think the more we can talk about it, the more we can advocate and educate parents and teachers and the world about this, the better. Because reading is fundamental, and I could not imagine growing up and not knowing how to read. It's terrifying to me. So,
thank you, Dr. Stetson. What is your final thought?
Well, I would say that it is critically important to be part of the greater conversation, because there are many school districts that are failing their students, and not necessarily intentionally, just out of ignorance or out of a belief system that's been pretty powerful in American education for a really, really long time. And so the parents that are out there have been really critically important in moving the dial. And so, when I arrived in this, I've done this in a couple districts. This is my third now that I'm sort of fighting the literacy battle. And it's been a really hard fight for 30 years to try to break through a lot of the mythology. And so becoming part of the greater conversation, like I went to Boston and testified on Beacon Hill for the Massachusetts bill. We were one of the last states to have one. I helped to write the dyslexia guidelines for the state because they needed to have school administrators saying, no, this is wrong. We really need this kind of direction to move the needle forward. And so that kind of advocacy has really been parent driven. But it's critically important that school districts join in that fight, because I know that Dr. Nadine Gabb told me that when she did the BOLD study and was talking to administrators all over this state about this issue, there was a lot of concern that, oh my goodness, if we screen, and this was back when she was first developing the early bird screener, if we screen and we uncover all these children, then we don't have the resources or the knowledge to deal with it. And it's, the expense and I just repeat, you can't afford not to do this. The cost in human, just the humanness and a child's development and their future is too great. And and if you don't care about that as a practical matter, the cost in trying to support them academically later on, when they've really fallen far behind and they can't access the content, is far greater than the interventions that we can do when they're young and when they really need us. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mrs. Doe, final thoughts?
Well, I think I would urge any parent that if, if something's not right and you've researched it and you've reached out to somebody, if you're fortunate enough to know somebody like Dick O'Mara, and if what the research says you should be getting from the school has no reflection of what the school's telling you, trust your instincts so that you can just keep advocating.
That's right. And we're here at the IDA are here to point people in the direction of resources if you need them. Dr. Wazowitz, will you give us the final thought?
Final, that's a lot. I want to pick up on two things. One is the early identification. And yeah, we can't afford not to. But the earlier we identify these students, it is much less expensive in emotional toll, as well as the dollars that the schools are putting out. If I get a student, I mean, I basically want to just, get on my knees and thank a parent who calls me when their child is still in kindergarten or first grade. It is so much easier for everybody if we can intervene then. So in the long run, the schools are actually going to save on intervention dollars. But yes, upfront, there's going to be more output. So, and with that early identification, I'm going to go back to spelling because I think it was Dr. Stetson who mentioned earlier that a lot of these students can kind of slide by until third grade based on their reading, but almost always they're poor spellers. And you can use spelling as kind of the canary in a coal mine. If they're poor spellers but good readers, there's really no such a thing as a good reader, poor speller. They're really not a good reader. They just haven't hit that wall. So doing spelling diagnostic testing, spelling error analysis is really critical. Going back to what Mr. O'Mara said, in terms of what a teacher can look for, a professional, in terms of what might be an orthographic processing issue, it's when they're representing all of the sounds, just not correctly. So a student who spells rocket, R-O-K-I-T, well, yay, phonologically, they seem to be doing really well, but they don't have that orthographic piece yet in place. So those are the kinds of spelling errors you can tease out with a really good spelling diagnostic prescriptive test. And my last thought, I know I'm taking two, but this is really important. And the Andover School District did this. So yay, again, to Dr. Stetson and everyone else involved. Get out of the silos, have the conversations. The person who asked a little while ago about their admin doesn't want to talk about signs of reading or whatever, just get together in a PLC or whenever and have all the different stakeholders talk to one another. That's going to save money too, because dollars to donuts, you've got a kid in speech therapy who's also in special ed, and they have the same crossover deficits, and you can save a lot of money there too. But get out of the silos, come together, and it will be better for all.
Thank you so very much. I need to thank. Go ahead, Mrs. Doe. We got time.
Is there any way we will be able to print out this chat, because there are so many good questions in there? Will we be able to access to that afterwards?
Will we? I don't know. Will we? Yes.
I can download it for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Fantastic. I would like to thank our sponsor for tonight. Our sponsor for this event is Lexia Learning, who are right now part of an initiative in New Hampshire to improve teacher education by providing free letters training to anybody who wants it in the whole state, up to 9,000 people. Amazing. So isn't that amazing? And so I would love for efforts like this to grow, more states to kind of join in and say it's worth investing in our teachers, building knowledge in our teachers, and to all of us who are working really hard, okay? Keep fighting the good fight, right? We have to know better in order to do better. So give yourself grace, never stop learning, and never stop working. All right.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you all very much. And we will keep fighting the good fight, and we'll see many of you tomorrow on day 2 of this fantastic conference.